Hi, I'm Governor Matt Meyer, and welcome to Matt Chats. On this podcast, we're talking with change makers. So join me as we sit down with the people who are making a difference and hear how they're working together to lead our way to a better Delaware. Hi, this is Governor Matt Meyer. As a former teacher myself, and because it's back to school time, we thought it only made sense to kick off our first episode with Delaware's very own Secretary of Education, Cindy Marten. Now we're not just anywhere. We're here in Miss Taylor's library in Stanton Middle School. Shout out to Miss Taylor, Mr. Robinson, the principal, Dr. Darrell Green, the superintendent of Red Clay Schools, for hosting us today. But we're fortunate to have a Secretary of Education, Cindy Marten. Secretary Marten brings more than 3 decades of experience, 3 decades as a teacher, principal, superintendent, and national education leader. Before coming to Delaware, she served as the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Education, leading nationwide efforts to close opportunity gaps and strengthen literacy programs. She also led the San Diego Unified School Districts, one of the largest school districts in California, in fact, in our country, from 2013 to 2021 for 8 years, where graduation rates hit record highs and students achieved some of the fastest reading growth in the nation. And now I'm thrilled to chat with Secretary Cindy Marten. Welcome, Madam Secretary. You are the guest on the first episode of the Matt Chats.
I'm so excited to be here with you on the first day of school. It's my 37th first day of school since becoming a certificated teacher, but it's been my dream to be a teacher since I was 5. So there is nothing like first day energy here in this school district. Some districts started last week. A lot of them started today, and there's nothing better.
That's right. It's all the excitement across our state. Everybody thinking of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
What they
First
might
day,
do.
first day backpacks, first day outfits. We're high-fiving kids on the way in, and my grandmother gave me a mug on my first year of teaching, a Norman Rockwell mug with the poem of first day of school with a little painting on it. And so my tradition on the first day is drink a cup of tea from that and head out the door to greet students and welcome them to a new year of possibility.
Yeah.
And to do it here in Delaware, to do it with you, a teacher who understands what teaching is like, and now you're governing in this first state to get education right for kids.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking of governing, just moments ago, we signed 9 pieces of legislation. This secretary has hit the ground running. A few months ago, you weren't living here. I don't know if you'd been here before, but now you've helped to guide through 9 pieces of legislation that are changing what's going to happen in our schools across our state. And anything of note there?
It's great. We just signed these bills. One is about breakfast in the classroom, making students have this universal breakfast. And we know when students are nourished, they're able to learn. And we want all the learning conditions to be optimal. So that was really important. Big movement there. State has done great work on this. I mean, we need accountability. Mm-hmm. And that's when you sign these into law. We have laws in Delaware protecting students, supporting students, and educators. The educator pipeline's investing more in our educators. And also there's a bill around school board accountability and making sure that school boards have proper training and that school boards are present to serve the communities that they're elected to serve. So the bills today just represent the landscape around teachers, around the accountability that matters, around nutrition for students. These things matter, and it starts with that, but it also includes teacher voice, teacher autonomy matters, principal leadership, superintendent leadership, and do our students have the kind of teacher they deserve in front of them for high quality? Tier 1 instruction is an education term, but high quality instruction in the classroom, that matters. But we signed a bunch of bills today that show that this matters, support and accountability.
Absolutely. Really important. We're at a unique time for our state. We are the first state in the United States, as I think most Delawareans know, but our state has never had a governor and a Secretary of Education who both had classroom teaching experience. I know for me, it's something that shapes me, shapes what I do every single day, shapes how I govern, the sense of possibility you have as a teacher. I started my teacher journey in a program called Teach for America, where they actually placed me in a 4th grade classroom in the Anacostia section of DC public schools. I was the only person who would go in that building each day who was not a person of color. And the school was closed by a judge at one point because the roof was literally collapsing. And I think I'm supposed to say, after an experience like that, how terrible it was and how awful the kids and everything was. But but I got inspired every single day by kids, some of whom came from two-parent families and everything looked like the Brady Bunch, as good as can be, and others facing incredible struggles of violence and disruption at home and insecurity in housing. And I got an opportunity to teach kids who would overcome and would achieve and would, were able to cut through distractions and get somewhere. And to be some small part of that is something that I never forget, that you truly can do anything. And I often think of teachers across our state, and I think they're looking to me and to us for leadership. They're looking us for guidance, for at times accountability. But I occasionally look at them with a little bit of a jealous eye. What they do every day is there's honestly nothing like it. Tell us about your experience as a teacher.
Well, you're right to say that this is quite an opportunity for Delaware, that both of us are leading, but we're leading with a teacher's heart, that we've been teachers. And I was a classroom teacher for 17 years before I went into administration, becoming a vice principal, the things that you outlined, and some of the other jobs that I had. But my life's work has been teaching. And kind of a similar story in terms of the teaching that I did. I actually started in a private school where there wasn't any struggle, any risk factors, anything that the students came ready, well-educated families, and I spent some time there. Then I went to a suburban school in San Diego. My whole career was in San Diego before I went to Washington, D.C. to be deputy secretary. And I was in a suburban school that was 50% Title I low-income students, had Section 8 housing across the street. 50% of the students came from families that had different access to education as they were growing up. And I spent some time there. I spent 7 years at that school, and I began to see what happens when there's equity or when equity isn't being delivered. And the expectations at the school were sort of two sets of expectations. Do what you can for the kids that come from the Section 8 housing across the street, the kids that come from the houses up on the hill. There's almost like a double standard. Mm-hmm. And the principal questioned that. The principal interrupted that and asked us a lot of questions. And we began to use data. We began to use quarterly assessments for learning. I became the literacy specialist at the school, and we began to interrupt old patterns and beliefs. And when you do that, things begin to change. When you realize that every student that walks in the building has a chance to achieve at high levels and not sorted based on their background, that's where I learned that your demography does not need to determine your destiny. The most important work that I feel like I did was then leaving that school and going to an inner city school in San Diego with 100% poverty, meaning 100% Central Elementary.
And what was the motto?
The motto of Central, we called it the Central Way: work hard, be kind, dream big, no excuses.
Work hard, be kind, dream big, no excuses. That should be Delaware's new state motto.
It works. It is, there are words, but what's behind the words is a commitment to creating the conditions where every student can achieve, no matter what they walk into the building with. This was not a small inner city school. This is a large inner city school, 1,000 students, pre-K through 5, 100% Title I, 85% English learners, border town. We're 15 minutes from the U.S.-Mexico border. Every risk factor known to education existed on that campus, and I was there to take the experiences I had in the private school, in the suburban district, to say, why can't we have this in the inner city school? Mm-hmm. Why can't we give every kid the fighting chance? And when you talk about your inspiration, the best job in the whole world is creating learning conditions in an environment like that, where we infused arts education, science education, hands-on, we call it hands-on, minds-on learning, that students can actually have the highest quality educators, change the teacher turnover rate, invest in teacher professional development, and actually show how a good, high-quality urban school can deliver for students. I love doing that work. I love creating equity. And if your demography doesn't determine your destiny and you believe in the hope and promise of a high-quality education, then act. Do what we know works. And 10 years that I spent at that school led me to, a big surprise to myself, become the superintendent of the whole school district. There was 200 schools in San Diego. Mm-hmm. I was at one inner city school, one of the 200, for 10 years, and the Board of Education had a vision they called it Vision 2020 at the time. So in 2013, they wanted to see a quality school in every neighborhood. They had not made enough progress on the vision in their mind, this 5-member elected board, and they saw some schools had begun to interrupt these long-standing biases and things that were preventing students from achieving their potential, and they wanted to see that go district-wide.
So how do you do that? If they're looking for a quality school in every neighborhood, presumably back in 2013, the school board and communities were looking and weren't seeing a quality school in every neighborhood. What do you do?
It's very local, and yet there are solutions that are global. And so at number one, it's tier one instruction, which I mentioned earlier, which is teaching and learning in the classroom, giving teachers the support to address some of the most difficult challenges kids are having. If you're a third grade teacher and kids aren't reading on grade level in third grade, that doesn't get fixed in third grade. That gets solved at the very beginning with preschool and kindergarten, first and second grade, and using quarterly assessments, giving teacher time to work in professional learning communities where they're actually looking at data, they're looking at interim assessments, they're getting feedback, they're planning lessons together. We also put holistic supports in place. We built a school-based health center. We put the arts program in, the science program in. We had school counselors support. So teachers had holistic supports outside the classroom, but also supports in the classroom. And at the end of the day, it's a community-based approach driven by teacher voice and agency with high-quality principal leadership. If you don't have a strong principal, it's very hard to say that every classroom in that school is going to give the students the opportunities they deserve. You need principal leadership, superintendent leadership, and at the end of the day, you also have school boards, which is SB 77 that we passed today, is how are school boards holding superintendents accountable, how are superintendents being given the supports that they need to support the principals. So it's a cascading, focused effect, and I go back to what you said about our love for teaching. It comes from actually putting the right supports in place for people.
Yeah. And it's challenging to take those skills, the art of teaching a classroom of students from all different backgrounds, creating high expectations and delivering on those expectations. It's pretty different skill set from being a superintendent or being a state secretary of education.
It's what I love nothing more is creating systems that you can scale, that if you figure it out in one classroom, and then you can figure it out at a school, and then a district, and then I went to the national level when I was deputy secretary, and now I have the honor of serving your administration for getting Delaware, right? That it's a scale issue and it's a systems issue. And when you know and trust and believe the point of local matters and teacher decision-making, teacher voice, principal voice, superintendent voice, then at the state level, how do we get a whole ecosystem of the state moving in the right direction and giving kids the support that they need?
You know, it's kind of former senator and former governor Tom Carper said to me, Matt, you want to be a really good governor, just find out what's working and do more of that, and find out what's not working and do less of that.
Well, when I first got here, you actually came to one of my first meetings with all the chiefs, and I used that exact model in research terms. They call it positive deviance or appreciative inquiry. Positive deviance comes actually from a medical model. It means you find a deviant behavior, meaning it's different from the norm, that's getting positive results. Appreciative inquiry is find out what's working. And we said to the superintendents when we brought them all together when we first started was, your superintendent, however many schools you have, if your achievement isn't where you think it should be, which it's not, or Delaware would not be having the literacy crisis that we're having, then where are you going to begin? And it's counterintuitive. You want to go to where it's broken, and you want to go to where the emergency is to put the fire out. But appreciative inquiry, and what the governor told you, is if you've got, as a superintendent, if you have maybe only one classroom who's got something going on, you got a place to start. And appreciative inquiry means you get into an inquiry and say, how did that teacher do that, given the same conditions, the same supports as everybody else, and what you appreciates is the idea. So if you're paying attention to what's broken and not working, you're going to get more of what's broken and not working. And then you start to replicate and scale, and that's where the magic happens. You're replicating and scaling the very best practices in the same conditions. That's the only way I've ever seen. I mean, look, if you and I could just sign some laws to mandate better outcomes for kids in Delaware, we would have signed them today and just said, okay, everybody go do it. You cannot in education mandate what matters, because education at the end of the day, hyper-local, and it's a human-based endeavor. You have to know your students by name, by strength, and by need, and you have to, in the classroom, provide the supports that they need. But we can do a lot from a perspective in terms of accountability and support and making sure the dollars go where the dollars need to go.
William Butler Yeats, one of my favorite Irish poets. This is a math teacher quoting an Irish poet from English class. Says, "Education is the lighting is not the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a fire." And so it's hard to scale up lighting fires. It's easier to scale up filling pails, but filling pails doesn't get the job done. I also find it interesting when you talk about find something that's working and scaling it. That's one thing I learned as a teacher, that every classroom I ever went into had some students who from day one were performing. They were on task. If there was something to do, they would do it often with excellence. And there were some students in the class that weren't performing. My impulse as a teacher who wanted all students to perform was to focus on those students who were really struggling. But I found as a teacher tactic, if you give a lot of attention and love and support to those doing amazingly well, other students are like, wait a second, I want to do anything to be like them. And next thing you know, the right kind of behavior and the right kind of performance is spreading the way you want it to spread, which is very similar to what you're talking about, what we want to see in Delaware.
It's a brilliant teacher move. It's actually leaning in on what's working and figuring out a strengths-based, assets-based approach. And when you have a class that has what you want to see more of, lean in on that, notice it, name it, talk about it, so then the student that isn't doing it yet learns from their peers. That's the most powerful learning that we can provide to our students. And do that with the schools in Delaware where it's working. Learn from that.
Yeah. Great. All right. Let's not sugarcoat it.
No, sugar-free.
Sugar-free is our Adjutant General, General Benson, likes to say, let's give it to you sugar-free. Putting aside what's going on outside Delaware, you look at the hard numbers, the outcomes, you look at our ranking across the country, and quite frankly, you look at how our country is doing in terms of educational attainment compared to other developed countries around the world. The numbers aren't good. It does not look good. Delaware, by measures, is often in the bottom 10 of states. I tell my wife when I wake up and look in the mirror each morning, I know one of the primary reasons I was elected governor is because people want this problem addressed, and they want it addressed with urgency. And we've spoken a little bit about some ways we're going to do it. Find classrooms where stuff is really working. You don't want to throw everything out and say everything's terrible. Let's find things that are working. Make sure we're making investments in those things, and make sure we're holding everything accountable, whether it's school boards or principals or individual classrooms and teachers. The job is harder today than it was when you agreed to do this in January. The Trump administration is often by executive order, probably by legislation that is coming, looking to really decimate programs like Title I, programs like IDEA, programs that are serving the least among us in our vulnerable classrooms, really trying to address educational equity. What do we do?
I mean, this is my life's work, and I'd like to think when you and I first started talking about me coming here, I understood the crisis that Delaware was in. Now the context that we're in, that you just pointed out, what's happening at the federal level, that's our context. But the crisis is still the crisis. The emergency is still the emergency. And I want to move us past talking about it, admiring the problem, wringing our hands in, worrying, what are we going to do, to actual action. And if at the federal level something is preventing us from doing that, we have to find our own solutions here in Delaware. And I'm here to say we actually have them, but are they taken to scale? Have we invested properly? Is there equitable funding across the state? One of your biggest missions is to have an equitable student funding formula. We have a funding formula that is old and needs to be addressed.
1940s, oldest in the country.
It needs to be addressed because at the heart of that is something inside there around the way the money is flowing to our schools. So we're taking that on, and when you talk about the test scores, we've got to talk about the leading and the lagging indicators. By all the measures where Delaware is in the bottom 10, those are the lagging indicators. When we get our investments right, which is not to say there hasn't been great investment in education. Delaware has done a lot around investing in education, whether it's a full-day kindergarten, SB 100, 200, 300, where we're investing in counselors, investing in the teacher pay through the PEC committee. investing in the opportunity funding. Many things have been done. So understand what has been invested in already. But then think about the new way forward as we develop a hybrid weighted student formula that actually puts money where there's greater need. There has to be greater investment, which doesn't ignore the investment that's already on the table. You start with that and say, are we distributing that with equity in mind? And then think about when the federal funds, if IDEA and what's happening for students with disabilities, title funds for most of our most vulnerable students, as we look at how those begin to flow, we still have a clear mission here. And I've always said, when I was superintendent, we had a $1.2 billion budget in San Diego. Every year for 8 years, our budget was cut by up to 12%. You started with the outcomes that we got, the fastest reading growth, the highest graduation of large urban districts. We were cutting our budget while we were getting improvements. So I'm not here to say it's just about money. We have to have a clear vision in Delaware around funding our schools and the types of accountability that needs to be put in place where there's greater investment, there needs to be greater accountability. And what does that accountability look like? Start in the classroom with the leading indicators. Do principals know how students are doing on a quarterly basis? You're not waiting till the end of the year, final assessment after the kids are already out of the classroom where you can't do anything about it. Do you get on-time measures, assessments for learning, rather than the assessments of learning? The assessments of learning are the lagging indicators at the end of the year, too late to do anything about it, and we need to see those change. But those don't change because you just wish and hope they change or because you just throw money at it. It's strategic investment in high-quality Tier 1 instruction, professional development, listening to teachers where they have voice and agency over their own classroom, and the voice and agency that teachers have are also connected to quarterly measures where you can say, are students achieving? Are they making progress? If not, whatever intervention you put in place from September to December, by December, you know if that's working or not. If it's not, you readjust. And by the way, interventions, Tier 2, Tier 3, we call it MTSS, multiple tier systems of support. Sometimes those are all out of the classroom, what you're going to do to solve the problem. What are we doing to support the teacher in the classroom? Delaware passed Science of Reading. We already know what high-quality instructional materials look like. We already have laws around Science of Reading. Now we want to have teachers being able to collaborate with each other and have the best teachers. We have teachers who are already getting amazing results. How are those teachers being elevated in the profession to become coaches, guides, and mentors in a strategic staffing model to help the other teachers in the school? One teacher, one classroom, close the door. Those days are over. Teachers have got to work together.
Absolutely. What I find interesting, we had, to bring us back, Leave No Child Behind, and it left children behind. And we had Race to the Top. And very few students, classrooms, schools, districts made it to the top. And I think it ultimately comes down to whatever we name it or the program is, the teachers have to have the highest quality classroom management and instruction, and we got to get the right principals in the right places, because you're not going to see a terrible school with a great principal, and you're not going to see a great school with a terrible principal.
That's right.
And I think you and I both have that, not just that understanding and that vision, but that personal experience where we saw it ourselves.
That's right.
What do you think about safety in school? It is an issue in Delaware. It's just been an issue in this school year.
I mean, school climate and culture is deeply connected to learning and to learning outcomes. That's human at its base. If you don't feel safe, you can't learn. And so, but the answers for safety are not as simplistic as one might think. This is deep culture. This is students being known by name, by strength, by need. I know your story. I know your history. I know your family. We don't stand in judgment. We see your deficits as your strengths, and we have a strengths-based approach. And is every student actually known and seen? And then you can interrupt systems of violence that actually permeate classrooms if you're not having a holistic structure for that. I really think the places where I've seen school safety be the strongest, and this is when I was superintendent and then traveling the country as deputy secretary, is the culture. And the culture starts with the school principal. The teachers feel like they have support when students are interrupting learning. You know, we can bring in Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. That means you're teaching students at their point of need.
Vygotsky?
Yes.
Vygotsky zone of personal development.
Zone of proximal development.
Zone of proximal development.
The model is really, you could call it the Goldilocks method. If the teaching is too hard, they're not going to learn. If it's too easy, they're not going to learn. You're teaching students right at their point of need. This is tier 1 instruction in the classroom. When students are engaged, hands-on, minds-on learning. You talked about the kids that you used as your model, and you said, oh, well, my model students helped the kids that were having trouble. You were actually creating a classroom culture where everybody felt engaged. Discipline goes down. Discipline problems go down when students are engaged in meaningful work that's meeting them at their point of need. And everybody's point of need might be different. When I worked at the inner city school for 10 years, it was in a part of the city that there was horrible violence, and documented gang members had their students in our school. And there were days when students came to school the night before witnessing a murder. And they walk into the classroom witnessing a neighbor being murdered the night before and expected to just, okay, let's start teaching math this morning. You got to meet them there. Now, we don't want to stop their education. They need to learn, but you understand the whole of the child that's walking into the classroom, and you don't divert from work hard, be kind, dream big, no excuses. But do we understand the full context? And do we have the right supports for the full context? And if a student needs a moment, a student needs time, or you need to do a classroom circle to reset the day, to get ready for our learning and not ignore what may have just happened. Adults were in and out of children's lives, whether it's through gang violence, through arrest, through deportation, through leaving because they worked 3 jobs. We had 5. My husband worked in the he worked in the hotel industry, and he worked at 5 Diamond Properties, very high-end properties in San Diego. He's since passed away, so I dedicate most of what I do in education to my late husband, Sergio. But he worked in the hospitality industry, and I worked in the inner city. And he used to joke and said he serves 5 families, 1 family with 5 homes, and I serve 5 families living in 1 home. Do we understand the context and the environment that our students are in, and not use those as excuses for why students might not be learning or achieving to their potential, but the overall full context that you see the whole and complete human being coming into school? So you said, what do we do about school violence? And I gave an answer that was more holistic in terms of the whole community. We built a school-based health center. We worked with our community partners. We worked with beautiful community partners. And I see that happening here in Delaware. The whole community is coming around gun violence. You've opened the office for gun violence.
Signed a bill today that makes it easier for out-of-state psychologists to come into schools through an interstate compact. So
that's the holistic support we can do.
Speaking of holistic support, I don't want to compare you to other Delaware secretaries of education, but I cannot imagine there's been a secretary of education who's a bigger activist and advocate supporting the public library system. And we signed a proclamation, Literacy Month proclamation, that puts guidelines in place to help libraries address the literacy emergency. It's a freedom of speech bill that puts guidelines so libraries, when they want to remove certain materials, it's based on well-established structures, not based on political persuasion. What do you think when we're dealing with, when you go outside the school building, there's so many supports and opportunities and some risks there to help us do our job better to improve the educational outcomes kids have. What do you think should be done?
I want all of Delaware to be part of addressing this literacy emergency. This isn't only the teachers. Of course, we want teachers to be equipped to know how to teach all students how to read and read on grade level, but you're also infusing a love for reading. You're making sure students actually fall in love with reading, choose to read, want to read. People describe illiteracy like if you graduate and you're illiterate, the school didn't teach you how to read. There's another problem. It's called illiteracy, meaning you can read, but you don't choose to read, write, do math for multiple purposes and audiences. And all you do is just like read a social media. How are you reading and engaging in what Frank Smith calls the literacy club? Are you in the literacy? You're highly literate. How many languages do you speak?
I speak 3, I think, well. I can greet people in 20 different languages. Mamukase for any Shona speakers out there, and Endemanish for Amharic speakers, Habari Zenu for Swahili speakers, ¿Cómo están for my brothers and sisters in the Spanish community.
So language matters to you. You're a language user, you're multilingual. We want to have more ideas around Delaware where what are we doing with our libraries, with our independent bookstores, where students, do all of our students have an author that they can name that they love? Do they have a book or a book series that they're reading? It's a Treehouse Club or whatever they might be reading. Are they sharing books with one another? When you were county executive, I think you told me you had a reading club, a
Newcastle County Reads. This is like the best event. I mean, I'm a sports fan. I love sports fan. I've never been to a better tailgate than the tailgate outside our Newcastle County Library NCC Reads event at the Chase Center. You got book groups, hundreds of book groups, over 1,000 people come to see an author speak, who over 1,000 people read the same book, and they party. They throw parties celebrating that author. And
I want to see that expand across the state, because what that does is it sends a message to our students that reading is cool. Like, this matters. Do students have literate models? When I was a teacher, I used to keep a reading log every day. Every morning I'd come in and write what book. They always knew what book I was reading. I always read at least 20 minutes a night. Sometimes I read 3 hours. I stayed up too late because I couldn't wait to finish my book. I would write what page I started on, what page I ended on. I'd give them a little snippet. The favorite book when I was teaching, I was teaching second grade, I was reading Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. It was before it was a movie, before the kids were so into me reading that book. But I always shared my literate life, because as teachers and as parents and as the governor, if you're a doctor, if you're a bus driver, if you're whatever you're doing as a contributing member of the great Delaware community, are you also sharing your own literate life? Are you reading more than just tweets?
It's amazing how much my 18-month-old now, he will put on my shoes. Cutest thing. He about 5 months ago, started walking, and about 30 seconds later, he started running. And now he sees my shoes, he puts his feet in my shoes, walks around, he picks up my book off the table that I'm reading and opens it up like he's reading it. He just, it's incredible how kids mimic what they see.
So I want to use this opportunity on your very first podcast to make sure the message is to all Delawareans that they are part of solving this literacy crisis. That literacy happens, of course, in the classroom. The teachers teach kids how to read, develop the print sound code, read and write, and interact with text. But if there are no other literate lives in their house, if their homes are book deserts and they're not going to the library, they don't have. I'm about to get my Delaware library card. I can't wait to go get my library. How are we modeling our own literate lives? Are you currently, I'll ask every listener, what book are you currently reading? And are you sharing that with a young person so they see that you're actually reading, and you read for information, you read for entertainment, you read for joy, you read to solve problems, you read when you're sad to help you connect to somebody who went through something that you went through, you read when you're happy, you read to learn, you read travel books, you read around cooking. How are you showing that reading is a part of your life? And writing too, whether you're writing something, we had kids do a found poem. This is something you can do on a family outing where you just pick up language as you're going and you hear little different sentences and you put it into a found poem, but you're constantly creating literacy opportunities. But start with modeling your own reading. And the independent bookstores, I'm looking for all of them in Delaware so I can go hang out. Never underestimate the power of a read aloud. You're already doing it with Levi. When a little baby picks up a book and just starts turning the pages, even if they don't have the print sound code yet, they know there's a story in there. There's a whole other world in there. Share the literate lives you have. Show yourself as an actively literate person. So whatever book you want to do for your first book club as governor, we're all in. Delaware Reads.
Llama, red pajama. Maybe. Read what I'm reading. So I mentioned IDEA and what seems like a national attempt to leave students behind, quite frankly, particularly students with disabilities. I know for you, it's not just a teacher passion project or a principal or superintendent passion project. Students with disabilities is something deeply personal to you.
It's the reason I became a teacher, is my brother, Charlie. And if I did a podcast and I didn't mention Charlie, Charlie would be very upset about it. I talk to him every single night, never miss a call. He's in California. He's 60 years old now. He was born with developmental disabilities. And I became a teacher because I saw the difference teachers made in his life, and I wanted to be a teacher. And so when I think about what's happening at the federal level with IDEA, and when I travel around Delaware to look at the inclusive supports for students with disabilities, this matters to me deeply personally, and it has to happen with principal, superintendent, leadership. The laws are on the books, but are they being followed? Is there access? Do students have access to FAPE, free and appropriate public education? My family moved from Chicago in 1977 because when we lived in Chicago, Public Law 94-142 was passed. This is a law around inclusion. My brother and my family was being told that Charlie was going to go to a separate school, possibly be institutionalized. Charlie was never going to learn to do this. Charlie was never going to do the list of what Charlie wasn't going to do was long. And my mom and dad weren't having it. And so they researched where were states the most progressive in implementing full inclusion for students with profound intellectual disabilities. And at the time, they discovered it was Texas, if you can imagine, and California were the two most progressive states in implementing that law. I guess to this day, no offense against Texas, I have lots of friends there, but California, my parents found were implementing. And so that's how we moved to San Diego. And when I have IEPs from back in the day when they were on the pink NCR paper, carbon copy paper, of all of the work that was done on my brother Charlie and on his behalf. He ended up attending San Diego Unified School District that I eventually became the superintendent of. This is deeply personal to me because I saw the teachers that made a difference and I saw the teachers that didn't. And when the IEP isn't right and when the supports aren't in place so that there is full inclusion with the appropriate supports, then we're not delivering what students need.
And it's not just about schools, to me, or educational attainment. It's about the fabric of our entire society, of our community, of a state. What kind of state do we want to be? If we're not treating those with developmental disabilities in a way that gives them every opportunity in the world, who are we as a state? Who are we as a community? So we're excited to have you, Secretary Marten. Thank you for choosing Delaware. I know I know personally you had a lot of different options, and it's an honor for us to have you here, and we're excited about what we can achieve together in the future for our kids and families across the state with you leading the way.
I truly couldn't think of a better place to bring my experience and my story, my voice, my experience. That's all about me. But when I finished my 4 years of federal service, I thought it's not time to take my tools and go home. Although my mother did hope that I would just come back to San Diego when I finished in D.C. You know that very well. But there's work to be done. And my project of working on education at the national level, that ended when my service at the federal level ended. But my service to creating equitable outcomes for students at scale, that is not over. I'm committed to I make a distinction between my work and my job. I clearly know what my job is right now, Secretary of Education for Delaware. I work for you. You will be the first to say, I don't work for you. I work for the good students of Delaware. We're here to get results for the kids. That's why I came here as a governor who understands the time and the urgency and the moment that we're in right now. There is a moment right now as we recover from COVID, as we saw things change significantly at the national scale. What I learned in the last 4 years to see national best practices, plus the 20-something years before that, why not put it to good use here in Delaware? And I've spent my first number of months here up and down the state, learning all the different roads. I don't know the state like you do, but I am in love with this state. Going to different school districts, talking to, when I walk into a principal's office and they can put up a data wall and tell me what they're doing to help teachers get the supports they need in the classroom. When I see the holistic supports, when I see arts education being infused, science education, I'm finding where Delaware, let's weave this together. Let's use the methodologies that we know work, get something done for Delaware. Delaware is a model for the country to show what can happen when an entire state does what students deserve.
Absolutely. I'm excited. It's an exciting time. The numbers may not be good when you look behind us, when you look historically, but looking ahead with leadership, with extraordinary technologies that are at student and teachers and our fingertips, I'm confident we can turn this around and we can make a dramatic difference in the lives of so many Delaware kids and families that will reverberate for generations to come. So I appreciate you choosing Delaware. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your schedule today after our bill signing to make this podcast possible.
It's an honor. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to serve.
Thank you.